brothers has demonstrated two very important things. A, of course, is the kind of design thinking. We know the tanker watch. That's a very important milestone. Even when Apple Watch, when they try to launch the Apple Watch, they go back to the tanker watch, say, how do you come up with something? On the other hand, the brothers are also very good social networkers, right? They can build networks in New York, and they even, I think in one chapter you mentioned, they even tried to build a network in Florida, right? The winter retreats, right? Try to follow where your clients are. So how do you combine these two very different, important skill sets?
Yeah, I'm not sure they're all capable of doing everything, but I think that's a benefit of them being there being three of them. Three of them benefit logistically, as I said, Paris, London, New York. You can be in three places at one time, essentially, but also three, as you say, these different skills. So Louis was brilliantly creative, but he was, Grandpa said, hopeless with money. Louis used to, his grandpa used to say, Uncle Louis used to say to me, it suffices me to buy a share of a company and that share will drop the next day. He's like, I'm hopeless. Whatever I do is wrong. But he was brilliant at hiring people, right? So he got a really good team around him. Equally, Pierre in New York was a real businessman. And I think it's great that he was in New York because New York needed a different approach to Paris. Paris was very kind of the traditional capital of luxury. You didn't have to do things in a different way there. People came to Paris to buy jewelry. So Louis didn't really want to market Cartier. He thought advertising was beneath Cartier. If you wanted to attract European royals, they didn't want to see their brand in a newspaper or a magazine. It had to be more exclusive than that. Whereas Pierre, the middle brother, he's the one who went to America. He wasn't creative like Louis. It was Louis who came up with, as you say, that the idea of the first wristwatch for men. Louis came up with the idea of using platinum in jewelry, which was revolutionary back then. Pierre did not, but he was a brilliant businessman and came up with the idea. Well, he's the one who kind of insisted on, he started the branch in London and then passed it on to my great-grandfather Jack. And then he started the branch in New York. He understood the importance of globalization at a time when, as I said, Paris was the capital of luxury world. So none of Cartier's jewelry peers were opening branches in New York. They didn't need to. All the rich Americans were coming to Paris. All the rich Russians were coming to Paris. All the Maharajas were coming to Paris. Why go anywhere else? But Pierre was like, no, we need to have branches there. We need to have networks there. We need to visit clients in their homes. We need to make them feel like they're part of it. So that was very clever because it meant after the First World War, when these other French jewelry companies, Europe was struggling, Cartier already had roots in America. Also, actually, the way they married. So their marriages were also really important. They all married people who helped them. I can talk about that as well. Helped them financially, but helped them connect to people. So Louis, I mentioned, was creative and not a business person. But his father basically pushed him into an arranged marriage with a girl who was only 16 at the time, who was the granddaughter of the most famous fashion designer in the world, Charles Frederick Worth. So that linked this unknown jeweler, because Cartier was unknown at that time, with the most famous fashion house in the world. So the newspaper reports of their wedding, they talk about this beautiful bride and how important she is. No one even mentions that Louis Cartier is a jeweler. No one knows. But what does that do? That means that when then a client shops at Worth, that's his wife's company, and all clients shopped at Worth, by the way, queens, the Empress of Russia, American heiresses, they were then advised, oh, why don't you try a necklace from Cartier just down the road? It will look great with your dress, because they had this alliance. So as I say, they were very strategic. If they had the skill, that was great. If they didn't have the skill, they made the connections, either by hiring the people or in many cases, well, actually in all cases, they all married very well as well.
And also, I think he's very good at leveraging the old money to the new money, bridging the gaps between the tastes of the two continents. It's also very brilliant.
Brilliant. I totally agree. And that was Queen Marie of Romania. And not only did she visit the store, but then he had on the back of his chair, he had a plaque made saying Queen Queen Marie of Romania sat here. And it was, you're right, for the Americans, the new money, they were fascinated by all that history. And that was really the same thing happened. For example, obviously, as you say, the idea of his marketing techniques, that he didn't have the same facilities as we do today, like databases, but he did, database. He had cards for each client. They had a card with the client's likes and dislikes, what their favorite drink was, or the name of their children's were, often a client would buy jewels for his wife and his mistress. So they learned quickly on they had to have different cards for each, because he didn't want to let the wife know about the necklace for the mistress. But they were very clever at that. But also the idea, exactly as you say, today we have influencers. I find this interesting. Today we have influencers, but back then, who were the influencers? Yes, they were royalty. And my grandfather always said word of mouth is the most important advertising for Cartier. There's nothing better than a lady sitting next to another lady at a dinner party and saying, where is your necklace from? And that happened, of course, if you were in the royal court in England, or you went to one of the debutante parties and you saw someone wearing or one of the coronations. That was brilliant advertising. But also with the European royals, with the Maharajas, when Cartier did a big amount of jewels for the Maharaja of Patiala, before they gave them to him, they said, would you mind if we displayed them in our Paris branch? And they kind of had this big show to show, and obviously the Maharaja liked it because he wanted to be up to date with the most recent European fashions. And of course, the local Parisians loved it because they saw Cartier as creating this kind of Oriental dream world for the Maharaja. So you're right, they were very wise to that. And just that, I love the stories of how, so Pierre in New York, he was breaking into a new world. He was totally unknown when he went there. You can see that from the newspaper reports of his marriage to his wife. His wife is listed as his the title of his marriage is Heiress Weds Foreigner. It's not like weds a jeweler or anything. It's like he's just a foreigner. And he has to break into the market. And how does he do that? He's got so many great techniques. So he pays the bellboys of hotels and florists and the maitre d's of restaurants to give him tips when, so in a hotel, to give him a tip when a wealthy client is in town. Someone will run across and say, JP Morgan's in town, and then he'll be able to go. Or in a restaurant, when a couple looks amorous, and they might have a proposal coming along, then he kind of would be able to say to them, well, would you be needing an engagement ring? Or he pays the people on the ferry, on the ocean liners, to tell him when a client is arriving or not. So he's very clever. He sets this whole network up in New York to break into that world.